Well, welcome back to Niners Nightly. And if you're tuning in going, man, it doesn't sound like they're talking 49ers tonight. Well, we're not actually talking 49ers tonight because literally about 15, 20 minutes before Niners Nightly started, the Warriors announced, or Shams Charania announced, that the Warriors had acquired Jimmy Butler in a multiplayer trade. And that has caused us to kind of pivot and put Niners Nightly on hold, let's just say, for 24 hours. We're going to have Brad Graham stopping by talking about the Senior Bowl. But you know what? We can do that tomorrow night, and we will. So join us tomorrow night at 6 o'clock for a little Brad Graham and Niners Nightly discussion about the Senior Bowl. But tonight, we're talking Warrior basketball, and we're joined by the man who probably knows more about it than almost anybody in this market, and that's the great John Dickinson, who has been in the Hawaiian Islands this year covering Warrior training camp and has been at so many Warrior games, home and road, and he's with us on the UMA guest line to help us make sense of all the different angles on this deal. JD, thanks for jumping in, man. We really appreciate that, and I guess we should tell everybody that Shams, who's been all over this, has also just had a new report as much as like in the last 10 minutes where he says Miami is keeping Kyle Anderson for now. So Wiggins, Tucker, Anderson are in Miami, along with the Warriors' protected first-round draft choice. Jimmy Butler is now a Warrior, and Lindy Waters is in Detroit as part of this deal. JD, what did you think of this deal initially? And obviously you'd been following the Butler talk, and it was just, 24, 48 hours ago that he said, I won't sign an extension with the Warriors. So obviously something happened, and somebody got in between and made the extension happen and pulled off the trade. So obviously a lot has transpired behind the scenes in the last, let's say, 2 to 3 days.
Yeah, Larry, good to be with you, man. A lot going on here. And look, I think what happened was, Jimmy Butler was attempting to do everything he possibly could do to get himself to Phoenix. And I think Phoenix was the one team that may have been willing to go more than just the 2 years in terms of the contract extension. I think the Warriors were more than comfortable to do exactly what they wound up doing, which is align the contract, even at big money, for the next couple of years. I think Shams had 121, and I saw Anthony Slater. I don't know if either of them mistyped it backwards, but I saw Slater had 112 and Shams had 121. So either way, I've seen two different numbers on that in terms of the extension, but he declines the option for next year, so there's no opt-out. You've got him for the remainder of this year. You've got him for the next 2 years. It aligns perfectly with Steph Curry and Draymond Green. So I think the Warriors were more than comfortable. I think really what it comes down to is that the Phoenix Suns struck out in their ability to make a deal with the Miami Heat when the deal between the Warriors and the Suns fell apart earlier today because Kevin Durant said that he didn't want to come back to Golden State. So they had that three-way deal locked and loaded, and it would have had Durant come to the Warriors and Jimmy Butler end up going to Phoenix, and Wiggins and others, maybe Jonathan Kuminga would have been going to Phoenix. Wiggins, it sounds like, would have been going to Miami in that deal as well. But when that deal fell apart due to Kevin Durant, the Heat and Suns then tried to strike a deal, and I think when they couldn't and the clock started ticking, I think the Warriors basically made it known, hey, this 2-year extension's on the table. It's big money. It aligns. Just come to Golden State, and we'll try to win a championship at some point in the next 2.5 years. And so Jimmy reversed course, knowing that really the only other option for him was going to be, he might not have any options because the Heat were steadfast in attempting to not just be desperate and trade him. And I think there were things that were going to need to go back in the other direction if Kevin Durant was going to be part of that two-way deal between Miami and Phoenix. So it all ends up working out for the Warriors. My initial thoughts, Larry, I like the deal. Okay. Andrew Wiggins, and here's why I like the deal. One,
you liked Wiggins. I mean, it wasn't like you were anti-Wiggins or anything.
No, I like Wiggins a lot more than most people did, honestly. But Wiggins had to go in this deal if the Warriors were going to do this deal. And I think the first and foremost, most important thing that the Warriors had to do was to get a second guy, whether it's another alpha And Jimmy Butler's a big-time alpha personality. And look, the concern with Jimmy Butler as he has started to age is the fact that his availability has gone down. I mean, that's what started the whole feud between him and Pat Riley, which got this whole thing that's been going on for the last couple of months started in the offseason. But it's his availability. But Jimmy Butler wanted a contract extension, and Pat Riley said, hey, we're not going to pay him again, unless he's going to be more available. And that set this whole thing in motion. And so to have a healthy, happy, and motivated Jimmy Butler, what you needed to do was put up some money up front. So when getting the contract part handled and the Warriors going in and putting up the money up front, not 4 years at 60 per, but 2 years at close to that, I think is a nice compromise for both sides. It aligns with the Warriors vets. And here's the thing, Larry, once you get to that point where you're bringing in the alpha, then Wiggins has to go in the deal to facilitate the salary. So whether you and the other part of why I'm not as concerned about Butler Wiggins, even though Wiggins is younger and all of that, is the fact that Butler's going to plug right in and play Wiggins' position and is a better player when he's right at that position. So that is the first part I look at in terms of liking it. As far as the rest of what goes, I mean, the Warriors, it's a top 10 protected pick. The Warriors had been floated out there that they were comfortable moving their 2025 pick. It probably, if all goes well, I mean, it will convey, right? It won't be a lottery pick if the Warriors make the playoffs, but even if they end up a play-in team or they end up one of the last two teams in, it likely conveys at that point to Miami. So the Warriors don't have to worry about any picks getting tied up or anything like that for future years, which can limit your flexibility down the road. So it's a pick in a draft where they were already kind of out, and you want to be in on trying to make this team as competitive as possible. They don't need another project for 2025 in terms of the draft. And look, if things crater and go the other way and there's injuries and they end up in the lottery and they end up with the 8th pick or higher, then they'll end up keeping the pick and the thing gets kicked down the road. So you're protected there. The other part of it is, Larry, and I'll let you jump in here, they're not giving up any young talent in the deal. They did not give up Kuminga. They did not give up Pajemski. They did not give up Moses Moody, and they did not give up Trace Jackson-Davis or even a guy like Quentin Post, who's come on a little bit lately. So Wiggins had to go to facilitate it. Butler was going to take his spot on the roster as the starting small forward. They needed another alpha. And look, I think a highly motivated Jimmy Butler with Steph Curry, assuming the Warriors can do enough to get in the tournament in terms of the playoffs, like that's enough to put a good scare into some teams, if not win a series or two. And now you have a direction. I heard you talking about it at the top of the hour. Now you know you're all in for the next couple of years. And I'll finish the initial take on this note. The Warriors also still have ammo to go make another move. They still have expiring contracts that they can use to make a move between now and noon Pacific time tomorrow at the deadline. They could make another move tomorrow if they wanted to help augment this thing. They also have the ability to continue to develop their young players and maybe use their young players in trade as well in the offseason. Jonathan Kuminga, it's going to be interesting what they do with him. He could be a sign and trade candidate in the offseason. He could be somebody they just look to keep and continue to develop. He, I think, is an interesting fit next to Jimmy Butler, but I think they still view him as a super sub coming off the bench that might be a closing player. You could play Butler at the 3, Kuminga at the 4, kind of like you play Wiggins at the 3 and Kuminga at the 4 from time to time. So I really think they have their bases covered, and I really think they have a lot of options still available ahead of them.
A lot of people want to talk. 808 KMBR is the number. People lining up to talk about this, and we'll get to your calls here. But a couple quick questions for you, JD. You know the personalities. Andrew Wiggins, I think one of the great parts about Wiggins is that he has an easygoing demeanor. All right. I don't think Jimmy Butler has the same demeanor. But what do you think? What do you think of the I know you maybe don't know Jimmy Butler personally, but you know his reputation. He's got a great reputation for incredible toughness and intensity. But if it's channeled in the wrong direction, that also can be kind of dysfunctional. How do you see the personality of Wiggins, who's so kind of easy breezy on the way out? And then, of course, you got a very intense competitor and a guy who some people feel like game doesn't necessarily fit the Warrior game. He does a lot of ISO ball. The Warriors are, pace and space and pass and cut. And Jimmy Butler doesn't do a lot of passing. He doesn't do a lot of cutting. So, how concerned are you about the personality fit and just the overall game fit of Jimmy Butler with Golden State?
I think they need the personality fit that he brings. I think they need a little bit of edge to them. I think Wiggins can exist with his personality if you have a team that's got a number one, number two, number three. Like Andrew Wiggins was the Warriors' second best player during the title run, but I always joked that nobody told him ahead of time he was the second best player. It just kind of happened. He's one of those guys where if you tell him ahead of time that he's got to be that guy, it doesn't work out. But if it just kind of happens organically, and if you remember, the Warriors had gotten Klay Thompson back off of the two injuries for the second half of that title year. So Klay was kind of there, and Klay, that was the best stretch that Klay had post-injury with the Warriors before he ultimately left, was when he first came back in the title year there for January, February, and beyond. So you had Klay there, who everybody just, assumes because it's Klay, he's the two, right? So nobody's really thinking who's the two. Then you had Jordan Poole, who had emerged as the two in that, in Klay Thompson's absence, and he was big. And then you had other bench guys who were contributing. Now Wiggins ended up doing his thing, and he deserved it, and he was the second best player, and two-way Wiggs and all that. But he did it without the expectation of having to do it, and with, I think, the attention on all of these other players, from Steph to Wiggins to Poole to Klay Thompson and the like. And I think that's where he's at his most comfortable. Like I think you would love Andrew Wiggins as much as he had to go for financial purposes in this deal, Larry. You'd love Andrew Wiggins on a team with Jimmy Butler and Steph Curry and some of these other guys. Like you would have loved that. That's obviously not the way it works out in terms of the salary. So I think the Warriors need the infusion of energy. I think Jimmy Butler's an unselfish player. And if you're an unselfish player, I think you can adapt and fit into the Steve Kerr system. I also think the Warriors are going to have to adjust. And they're going to have to play. We've seen them do it a little bit with Kuminga. They're going to have to do it with Jimmy Butler to adjust to the things that he does well. Regardless of any of that, the most important thing, though, is they need somebody else who can get his own shot and get his own bucket and create for others. He's a willing passer. You may have to run different sets to get him in positions to be a willing passer, but he is not somebody that doesn't want to make the right play to get teammates involved. And I think that can lead to some good things for the Warriors.
Does this deal happen without Dunleavy and his relationship in Chicago when him and Butler played together for the Bulls? Does this thing come together if Dunleavy and Butler don't have that relationship, you think?
Possibly. Possibly not. I'm not sure the depth of that relationship. Maybe it does come out that there was a conversation had, and that's what allowed for this thing to end up getting done, in addition to the guaranteed money that the Warriors were going to put out there, and Jimmy Butler ended up having to wind up making a decision on that. By the way, I'm seeing on the screen here right now, I've got the couple of games up, the ESPN game that just ended up, and Shams is on the screen. It's a 2-year, $111 million extension is what they've got it as. So I think it's in the 111, 112 range as opposed to that 121 number. So that must have been a typo initially from Shams. And again, that wipes out a year that Jimmy could have opted into for next year. So it's basically one additional year. He gets a little bit more cash for that year and for the 2026, 2027 year, and everything lines up with Steph and Draymond. And again, as I mentioned, now this team has a direction and options, right? They're all about optionality. People got sick of hearing about optionality and all the different things they could do. They still have young talent that they can develop or look to move, and they did not give up their future for to bring in Jimmy Butler, and they still, as I look at it, have expiring contracts that can be moved in this thing. They used Schroeder's, but they still have GP2's $9.1 million, and they still have Kevon Looney's $8 million that can be put into a deal to look to acquire somebody. Now, are they going to want to do that? Those guys are beloved in the locker room. Now that they've got Jimmy Butler accounted for, I think it's less of a must. I had been on the train, hey, if you can't get Durant, you can't get Butler, you cannot just let these expiring contracts go away. Well, they cashed in Schroeder. They cashed in Lindy Waters. Anderson had a year left on his deal, so they get out of a year there in 25-26, basically gave that money to Jimmy in terms of a little bit of a raise for next year. So I think they did a really nice job navigating, not mortgaging the future, utilizing the contracts that they had in play, and then still keeping a little in their back pocket if there's a move that makes sense here between now and noon tomorrow.
We're going to take some calls in the next segment, but I do have to ask you before we break here. Nikola Vucevic. Now, I'm a big Vucevic fan. I loved him in Orlando. When he was an all-star. It was a few years ago now. But he's still playing at an incredibly high level. He's still a double-double machine. And there's some incredible efficiency in his game because he just really knows how to play. He doesn't waste a lot of shots. He doesn't dominate the ball. He's a really good player and an efficient player. As far as winning, I mean, ultimately you make this Jimmy Butler trade, you're trying to win, right? To me, I feel like they need Vucevic if they're going to win. I mean, if they're going to try to win this year, when I say win, I'd say if this year's only successful for Golden State if they can get their way to the conference finals. It's not an awesome year across the league. Steph, they want to try to win Steph that one more ring. I don't know how far they can get, but to me, if you could get Vucevic, man, he would give you that perimeter shooter and such a talented big that fits so nicely next to Draymond Green. I would love it if they could get Vucevic. How active do you think they still are for Vucevic? And will Vucevic with Butler, how far can they go in your mind if Vucevic plays well here?
Yeah, I think, and I'm doing the math right now. I'm looking at Gary Payton's 9.1, and I'm looking at Looney's 8. So that's 17.1. Vucevic is 20.
Right.
Now,
so you might have to throw somebody who's making a couple $1 million in there too.
Yeah, and I'm looking now. Lindy Waters is no longer an option there. The other issue that the Warriors have is you have to the Warriors, because they're up against the hard cap, and I'm not sure what the outgoing salaries, it's very tight. It's not just within the 20% rule. Normally if you're within 20%, you can take back a little more or you can give away a little more as long as it's within a certain percentage in a deal. The Warriors don't have that luxury because they're hard capped. And so if they take $3 million more back than they let go, they're not that far under the salary cap at this point. At least they weren't before this deal, and I would imagine they're not. I haven't crunched all those numbers yet. So I'm looking at the 17.1, and so it would have to be somebody that would make 2 point. You'd have to come up with 2.9.
Guy Santos or something like that.
Yeah, I mean it would almost have to be. It would almost have to be Guy Santos and like Trace Jackson Davis. That kind of like it would have to be. TJD's got 1.8. So I'm adding 1.8 to that, and you're still at 18.9, and so you're a little bit short there.
But, but they don't have to match up even, right? They just have to match up within 3% or something like that.
Well, yeah, no, that's true normally, but because the Warriors are hard capped, they're so hard capped that taking back more than they put out would put them over the hard cap. So that rule does not apply. And again, we'll have to recalculate all the math again after the Butler deal and who went out and came back, because they had to factor all that into these deals. It had to be almost to the exact hundreds of thousands of dollars that went out that were coming back. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to even do the Jimmy Butler deal. So that's how precise it would have to be. But like a guy like Trace Jackson Davis gets him to within $1.1 million. Of that, there's also maybe it ends up where you take another player back and you throw another player in. There's ways
Moses
to do
Moody
that as
makes
well.
a little bit more money.
Yeah, Moses Moody, I would not expect Moody to be in it because Moody has got a weird deal because he signed an extension. I don't want to go way in the weeds, but basically you're sending out 11. You're sending out 5.8, but you have to take back 11.5 because that's what his new contract is going to. So there's a rule because he signed an extension as to what. So I would imagine Moody's not a part of that. For that particular reason, because of the extension that he signed that bumps his salary up from 5.8 to 11.5. Beginning next year. So again, I don't want to get everybody all in the weeds. We can save that for Dubs OT, but yeah, they're within a million of where they would need to be if they were looking to do something like GP2, Kevon Looney, and Trace Jackson Davis or Guy Santos. I guess you could include them both, and that would put you over the top. The Bulls would then be taking a little bit more back in return. At that point. But I do think, to answer the Vucevic question, whether it's Vucevic, whether it's Miles Turner, I do think the Warriors need that stretch big. And take nothing away from Quentin Pope. They needed it when they had Wiggins as their starting small forward. They need it with Jimmy Butler as their starting small forward as well. So like that need doesn't change with the acquisition of Jimmy Butler. In some ways, they have the same issues that they had previously in terms of a roster construction, and only now you just have a better second player than you had before.
Let's take a timeout. We'll open up the phone lines. 808-KMBR, the phone number. A lot of moving parts here, but the trade deadline is tomorrow. Warriors have made a major deal in acquiring Jimmy Butler, a three-way deal. They've signed Butler to a 2-year extension. JD's saying that extension is 2 years, 112. Is that you said? 112
Yeah, 112.
Million?
Yep.
Yeah, 2 years, 112. That is a surprise to me that got done, because I know there was a lot of talk that, that was why there was discontent on from Butler's camp in Miami, and that maybe was going to be why there was going to be some discontent from his camp here if that extension wasn't, if they never crossed that bridge, or if the Warriors denied him that extension. But they've gotten that extension done, so they've traded for Jimmy Butler, then they made Jimmy Butler happy. So if you're sitting there going, well, hasn't Jimmy Butler been suspended 3 times this year? Yes, he has. But he is going to be in a much better mood in a Warrior uniform because of this 2-year extension for $112 million.
Real quick, I just looked up Miles Turner. He's at 19.9. So Miles Turner looks like 72,000 less than Vucevic. So you're basically in the same boat if you're the Warriors and you're looking at Miles Turner. And Miles Turner's an expiring contract as well, so you'd have to re-sign him. Vucevic has the 1 year on his deal for next year, in addition to the remainder of this season.
Yeah, and Miles Turner, I think most people would probably prefer Miles Turner to Nikola Vucevic, just because he's a younger player, maybe a little bit more athletic. But Vucevic at this point could be a major difference maker. He's that efficient. He's that good. He's a former All-Star. I mean, he's a truly great player. I mean, he's a little bit past his prime for sure. But for a perimeter shooting big, if they could add that piece, that would give them a much different looking, I think, look in the half court than they currently have at the end of games. So we'll take a timeout. We're going to come back, open up the phone lines. 808-KMBR is the number. Anybody who wants to jump in on this, feel free. Bang out the number, 808-KMBR. JD's in the house. We'll continue our conversation around the Warriors. It's Niners Nightly, as you can tell, on the Sports Leader.